Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Junia Doan. Welcome to Junia Doan's The Spark. Thank you for joining me today. My guest is Dr. Donald Abelson, the director of the Brian Mulroney Institute of Government, St Francis Xavier University, and an authority on think tanks in Canada and the United States. Welcome, Dr. Abelson. Tell us about the Brian Mulroney Institute.
The Brian Mulroney Institute of Government was set up in 2018, and it was the hope of our 18th Prime Minister to create both an undergraduate program in public policy and governance and a research institute to help promote research and teaching on leadership. So our goal really at the Institute is to support students who are interested in taking on leadership roles in government or the not-for-profit sector, possibly in the private sector, and also to increase awareness about common mistakes that leaders often make and how it is they could possibly avoid them. So it really is an institute that really speaks to Prime Minister Mulroney's legacy and his hope that young people will enter public service and that they will tackle some of the major challenges, not only confronting Canada, but challenges around the globe.
What do you consider a successful incorporation of the coursework? In other words, what do you hope the graduate will come out with or changed in their thinking, goals, values?
Absolutely. It's a 4-year undergraduate program in public policy and governance, and our hope is that students will develop the critical thinking skills that are necessary that will serve them throughout life, whether they go into government or, as I said, in the not-for-profit sector or possibly in the private sector. We want to help create well-rounded people who have the interests of Canada at heart and really want to make a contribution. They have a wonderful opportunity at St Francis Xavier University in Nova Scotia. This school was Brian Mulroney's alma mater. He graduated in 1959 and is certainly our most famous benefactor. And again, his hope really was to give students an opportunity to take advantage of our wonderful facilities, our gorgeous campus and supportive community, and to really develop an appetite for public service. And I think we're well on our way. In terms of performance indicators, we look at how much our enrollment has grown over the past 3 to 4 years. We've seen 140% increase in enrollment. We are graduating some very high caliber students who are already being recruited by federal government departments and international agencies and organizations, and they will serve as our ambassadors for this program. So a lot of other metrics that we use to evaluate where we are, but we're very pleased with what we have accomplished in the past 3.5, 4 years.
Is there an emphasis on domestic policy or international relationships?
Yeah, it's really both. Of course, because this is a Canadian university, we want our students to be able to understand the intricacies of policymaking in Canada, but they're also exposed to American politics, European politics, and of course, a whole range of policy issues, whether it's the environment, strategic defense, maritime security, border security, whatever it might be. Again, we really want to create a cohort of students who really have a thirst and appetite, just a burning desire to understand the complexities of policymaking and to make a contribution to enhancing the inner workings of policymaking in Canada and abroad.
Interesting. What is your role as director?
Well, my role is kind of interesting. It's almost a hybrid position. I'm responsible for the day-to-day operations of the Mulroney Institute. I'm responsible for developing, maintaining, and expanding our research program. We have a leading academic series with one of the top university presses in Canada, 2 occasional paper series. We have a distinguished speaker series, a fellows program, a visiting fellows program. So that's just part of my job. The other role really is to engage in public outreach. So to do interviews like this, interviews with other media outlets, to talk about some of the challenges confronting our government and things taking place in the world. And I do this along with a group of very talented colleagues and researchers who have expertise in various areas.
Now, you wrote a paper on Mr. Mulroney and Reagan. Mm-hmm. Tell us about your latest thoughts of friendship at the highest levels across government.
Well, of course, I'm in a unique position to be able to speak to the Prime Minister on a regular basis, which I do. And one of the things that I really wanted to explore was the relationship he had with the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. And it was really it was an interesting undertaking because I had insight provided by the former Prime Minister into their working relationship and personal relationship. And so one of the things I wanted to focus on was the extent to which the friendship they developed not only helped facilitate cooperation on the bilateral front between Canada and the United States, but more importantly, how their relationship helped them manage or accommodate dissent. And what a lot of people don't realize, given how strong their friendship was, that they actually disagreed on far more things they agreed on, but it was their personal friendship that really created a foundation, a lasting foundation for enduring cooperation between Canada and the United States. And now I'm going to be following up that research with a paper looking at the relationship between Brian Mulroney and President George H.W. Bush. And as you know, Prime Minister Mulroney was the first Canadian Prime Minister ever to be asked to eulogize not only one, but 2 American presidents. So he had a unique relationship with President Reagan and President Bush, a special relationship with the United States. And what my research has tried to do is to really shed light on a very important period in the bilateral relationship between our 2 wonderful countries.
Here's a speculative question. America and Canada are both Judeo-Christian, Western-oriented nations, so we have a certain commonality, but would that friendship ever be possible to the extent and the trust level if you were dealing with, or whoever was at the top, were dealing with, say, a communist organization or a totalitarian organization?
No, I don't think so. I think, the relationship between our 2 countries is largely based not necessarily on a common history, but a respected history. We know that there are fundamental differences between Canada and the United States. We understand that we are involved in an asymmetrical power relationship. We have 1/10 the population of the United States, but we share a 5,500-mile long border. We engage in over $2 billion a day in two-way trade. We consider the United States a close friend and ally. The relationship, like many others, has gone through ebbs and flows. But what we do understand is how critically important it is for our leaders to get along. And even though they might disagree on the directions of different policy initiatives, there has to be that common respect and decency that allows the relationship to move forward. And again, we've had some bumps along the way. There are many American presidents who have not appreciated what Canadian prime ministers have said. There are many Canadian prime ministers who've found themselves at odds with American presidents. And I think that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to focus on Prime Minister Mulroney and President Reagan, because that took us back to a very special time. And it provided us with lessons, important lessons, that we could all learn about how leaders can get along and the impact that that relationship can have on moving forward important policy goals for both countries.
Sorry, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about America, and I'm thinking that kind of philosophy is good for us to go back to if we can figure out how. And that is, what do we have in common? What can we share? And not all this endless emphasis on differences.
Absolutely.
It's a goal. It's a good philosophy for human relationships, at least here. I
Well,
don't usually make political comments, but I am appreciative of that cultural influence as being useful.
yeah, I think it is really important to kind of step back and see what kind of relationship we have enjoyed in the past. We are two sovereign countries that pursue at times very different interests, but that's natural. That's to be expected. So the national interests of both countries will not necessarily align. So what becomes even more important then is how that relationship is managed and nurtured and cared for. And I think what Prime Minister Mulroney and President Reagan were able to do, and in fact, what Prime Minister Mulroney and President Bush were able to accomplish even more, was to lay a proper foundation of respect. And even though they faced, pressure from different political constituencies that were pulling them in different directions, they were able to find that common ground. And as I concluded my paper, I said so much more can be accomplished by exchanging handshakes than insults. And I really believe that. And I think there is room in both countries for improvement. But we have to get beyond the bickering. We have to get beyond the infighting and really kind of figure out what is important in this incredibly important relationship between our two countries.
There's a certain peculiarity about the West, which is also makes it almost unique, and that is our ability to peacefully change presidents and leaders. So,
Right.
um, moving just a little bit away, when you try to look for students, what are you looking for? How do you make it known? Is it mostly an Eastern Canada interest? Is it a Western Canada? How do you see the student membership um, being in, say, 5, 10 years?
I don't think we're focused on recruiting students from any particular part of the country. At St. Francis Xavier University, half the students come from the maritime provinces. Um, the other half tend to come from three highly populated parts of the country: Alberta, British Columbia, and Ontario. We're placing more of an emphasis now on recruiting international students because we know
Hmm.
having international students in the class will certainly enrich the experience for all the students in the program. But what we're really looking for are students who feel strongly about their country, students who are interested in politics and economics and sociology and history, students who see themselves in leadership roles, who like to travel, who want experience. We have benefited enormously from the generosity of our donors. In a very short period of time, this very small liberal arts university of around 4,300 students has become one of the best funded undergraduate programs in public policy and governance in Canada. That's because Brian Mulroney, when he started this initiative or began fundraising for it, really felt that what the most important thing to him was giving every student an opportunity to get a great education, something that he was afforded. He came from a very modest background, just like President Reagan did, and he never forgot how important St. FX was to him. And so his desire isn't just about to promote his legacy, it's about creating future generations of leaders and giving back to an institution that gave him so much. And so when students meet with Prime Minister Mulroney and he visits campus regularly, it's an amazing experience to watch unfold. That they are actually in a room with a former prime minister who was a St. FX grad, who came from very modest means and reached the highest levels, not only in Canada but on the world stage. And so it's an amazing opportunity. We have a very committed benefactor and wonderful donors. So when you put it all together, I think we offer a very, very exciting package.
Now, you have an interest in think tanks. How did that come about, and what are think tanks?
I would say it's more of an interest. It's become an obsession. I started writing about think tanks as a PhD student at Queen's University. I was particularly interested in the extent to which a handful of American think tanks tried to shape President Reagan's foreign policy toward Central America. And that kind of morphed into a much broader research program on think tanks in the United States and Canada. I've also written about think tanks in Europe and the Middle East. I'm very interested in organizations whose primary goal is to shape public opinion and public policy. The question of what think tanks are continues to elude many scholars, but we're looking at organizations that are generally not for profit, most are charitable, that have as their principal focus a desire to shape the policy preferences and goals of decision makers, and have at their disposal an arsenal of tactics upon which they can rely to increase awareness about important policy issues. I could go on for hours and hours about what think tanks are and what they do, but they're absolutely fascinating organizations, the largest populations being found in the United States and in Europe. But it's an area of research that I've never grown tired of, and feel very fortunate that I found something that has really instilled in me a lifelong passion.
What I've noticed living in Midland, because we have a big company here, is sometimes the international spouses, the wives, um, they don't think of involving themselves in volunteer activities. And when in the Midland, and when invited, they say, "Oh, the government's responsible for that." So, what is the attitude in Canada towards sort of volunteers or people just taking on a project? Is it let the government do it, or the government handles that, or I see a need and I'm just going to start a program like Mulroney did?
I would say a lot of all of what you've said, or parts of everything that you've said. There are many organizations in Canada that struggle to stay afloat. When you look at the top tier think tanks in Canada compared to the top tier think tanks in the United States, uh, it's night and day. The top tier think tanks in the United States have budgets in excess of $100 million. In Canada, you're lucky to get to about 20 million. The budget of the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., which I've studied for years, is larger than the top 20 think tanks in Canada combined in a single year. So there's ample opportunity to volunteer. There's ample opportunity to engage in discourse around important policy issues. And I think one of the important things for all of us is just to remain aware, to remain engaged, to be civic minded, and whether it is a participant or an observer, showing up and listening to guest speakers, helping students, whatever it might be, but just to try and engage the public in a more educated understanding of what is happening in the United States and Canada and abroad, to focus on key issues and not, engage in the kind of hyperbole which unfortunately has dominated, I would say, both countries in the last number of years.
Are there any of the think tanks that take current policy and extrapolate it 50 years going forward or 30 years or something under various assumptions to see what might go wrong, right, what they may have to correct? And is there anything ever corrected at the government level?
Well, there are a number of think tanks in Canada and the United States that do just that. I mean, when you go back to the late 1800s and early 1900s, why were think tanks created in the first place? It was to help government think its way through complex policy issues. So when you look at the incredibly important role played by Andrew Carnegie and Herbert Hoover and Robert Brookings, these were people who believed during the progressive era that it was so important to bring together experts and allow them to apply their scientific expertise to public policy issues of the day. The Brookings Institution was responsible for the creation of a federal budget system. The United States didn't have one before Brookings put that on the table. The Council on Foreign Relations, incredible contributions to our understanding of war and peace. So if think tanks are really doing their job, it's not just about looking at what has happened, but what will happen and what are the various factors that come into play that policymakers have to understand. It's about looking at patterns of behavior. It's about looking at cycles. It's about looking ahead 10, 20, 30 years and trying to figure out what governments need to do, how they have to adjust in order to position their governments more effectively to address those types of challenges and needs. So think tanks aren't just about looking back. They're like Janus and Minerva. They have to look back and forward at the same time.
What is the role of social media in this? It seems bigger and bigger, even to me. Everybody's commenting on things and they have their podcasts and this and that. How does that new development play into think tanks, policy making suggestions?
It's had a huge impact, not only in shaping or influencing what think tanks do, but it has increased competition in the marketplace of ideas. And so, you have to put a lot of faith in the work of some think tanks, but that means doing your due diligence. Unlike many professional associations that regulate the behavior of various organizations and make sure that they have their members have certain credentials. So whether it's the American Bar Association, the American Dental Association, whatever it might be, think tanks are not regulated. The only way they are regulated is by, in Canada, the Canada Revenue Agency, and in the United States, the Internal Revenue Agency. So it's more about how the money is raised and the kind of partisan activities in which they may or may not engage that tends to preoccupy government, not the quality or lack thereof of the expertise that they are offering. And so it becomes incumbent on scholars, on journalists, on members of the engaged public to look at the work of think tanks and try to reach a conclusion about whether or not their recommendations make sense, whether or not they're foolhardy. But there really is no central body that is regulating the kind of work that think tanks produce. And right now, you're looking at about 9,000 to 10,000 think tanks around the world. And when you multiply that by the amount of work that they generate each year, and then you add to that universities and political pundits and other advocacy organizations and other participants who also engage in policymaking, it has become virtually impossible for most people to keep track of what has been said and what has been done, which forces people like me who study think tanks to focus on specific policy issues and to see how they've unfolded over time, decisions that governments have made, and whether or not their ideas have in any way been influenced by think tanks or other types of actors.
What I'm thinking about is corruption in government. We have some of that in the United States now
Right.
and probably another time. Is that something you have in Canada?
Oh, of course. I think in any democratic system, you have more than ample opportunity for various forms of corruption, whether it's in government or those trying to influence government. And some think tanks certainly serve as watchdogs. There are other types of organizations that do that too in both of our countries. But what concerns me more than anything else is if we, as educated citizens, cannot agree on what the truth is, if we cannot agree
That's an
on
issue.
right, if we can't trust those people who are elected to office who represent us, we have begun to chip away at the very foundation of democracy and the very strength of the American Republic. So when you put that on the table, that you can no longer take for granted that election results will be accepted, that you can no longer take for granted that there'll be a peaceful transition. And it's not only happening, or did happen in the United States, the seeds for populism have been planted in Canada and in other countries around the globe, as you know very well. And it makes us nervous, but it also provides us with an incentive to engage, not to sit back, but to remind our officials that they have a responsibility to speak up and to ensure that they are able to govern us effectively and that they are doing the right thing. So it falls on all of our shoulders.
It seems to me a study of history says it goes to more relaxed and more constrained between chaos and bureaucracy. And so, at least as an American, I'm asking myself, what is the constraint? I mean, where you can't say anything anymore, but where's the answer to that? That isn't really the way we are in the United States, but it is the way we are now. So what happens next? And I wish
Well,
there were a think tank and not just a ball reader about that. So maybe not a concern, but as my Russian friend said, I left Russia for freedom, and some of the things I'm seeing now is too much like Russia. So listen,
well,
thank you very much. I do have just one question. What values did your parents emphasize with you growing up?
my father just turned 94. I was blessed with wonderful parents who instilled in me a love of education and to never hold back. Never to be afraid to speak my mind, which I did throughout my lifetime with my three older sisters. Didn't always go over well, but just never to feel bullied, never to feel that my voice wasn't as important as everybody else's. And my father practiced law for about 40 years, and he taught me very early on, and he was very well connected with several cabinet ministers in different governments in Ottawa. And the one piece of advice he gave me that stuck throughout my life was, doesn't matter who you meet in life, whether it's a cabinet minister or the person who cleans your office at the end of the day, everybody deserves to be treated with respect and integrity. And that's how I've tried to lead my life.
Wonderful example, wonderful model. So thank you for appearing. Thank you for everybody for tuning in. Remember my motto, go out and do something kind for someone today you know and someone today you don't know, and do it every day this week, and I'll see you next time.
To contact Junia, send her an email at juniadonesthespark@gmail.com. For more information, program schedules, and news about future guests, go to www.juniadonesthespark.com. Thank you for joining us. See you next time on Junia Doan's The Spark.
Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.